Alrighty everyone, welcome back. It is now August 8th of 2023, and given that Disney, Lucasfilm, and other aspects related to Star Wars have really been going through a lot of difficulties, not just because of all the purges that are happening by Bob Iger and the board, and because of Kathleen Kennedy, but it also has a lot to do with the ongoing writers' strike, everything happening with WGA, and even the whole SAG situation. It's not making the overall process any easier. In fact, it's only creating more problems for Bob Iger and the board to deal with. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. And let's get right into exactly what's going on here with Kathleen Kennedy and technically George Lucas, alright? Everything's gonna fall into place here as we explain. Now, we know that Lucasfilm as a company has been going through a lot of controversies lately. Everything ranging from the whole Lizzo situation and those, of course, things happening behind the scenes right now about her firing by Disney because of all the claims by the dancers. We've talked about this a couple hours ago. But what makes matters even worse is what Kathleen Kennedy has been doing behind closed doors, specifically for George Lucas and George Lucas loyalists, so to speak. So let's get into all of this, shall we? Now, one thing about all of this is that we already know that Kathleen Kennedy is very incompetent. In fact, I would say more so deliberate. She really wants to tarnish the brand. She wants to strip away George Lucas's legacy without a doubt, and has no care about customers or fans or fandoms for that matter, right? However, that brings us to the next major thing, is that with Kathleen Kennedy focusing on the Acolyte series and Skeleton Crew, one major development that Kennedy recently did surprisingly had much to do with the firing of George Lucas's loyalists at Lucasfilm that were partially, of course, working on the Acolyte and were slated to work on Skeleton Crew Season 2. This comes just after Kennedy wanted to focus on Acolyte and Skeleton Crew projects becoming smaller scale ones, with a tighter crew and team, where for Season 2, of course, already is now planned by Disney. She recently moved ahead and laid off quite a number of Lucasfilm employees that so happened to be George Lucas loyalists that fully support his vision and what Star Wars stands for, from when they were employed since the prequels, and even some of which, surprisingly, from the originals. Kennedy laid off different employees that spanned multiple departments from working on the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew Season 2, further in order to not only tighten up the teams, but for each of those projects that had some of the employees that were creating issues for Kennedy as opinions and creative differences were rising. Now let me stop here for one moment. The problem with this is Kathleen Kennedy opposes anybody's view of going against her vision or siding with George Lucas, and I think it makes a lot of sense when you listen to Leslie Headland, who, by the way, right now is like Kathleen Kennedy's right hand. You know, she really is like standing as Kennedy's like sidekick almost to a degree. Leslie Headland back in 2019 had a podcast where she said, if you think that George Lucas holds the key or is the key to making Star Wars great, that's the misogyny. That's the problem, she said. And for somebody like that to be associated with Kathleen Kennedy, this makes a lot of sense. Why these employees that she fired, that she laid off from Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, Season 2 specifically, just so happened to be George Lucas loyalists is not a coincidence. Let's just put it that way. There's no way it was a coincidence. Now, what's interesting about this is that we already know that Disney is moving ahead with this Lucasfilm purge, where you're going to have a lot of Kathleen Kennedy loyalists fired as well. You're going to have just regular employees getting fired by Disney from Lucasfilm, and it's not personal, it's not creative difference-wise, it's more or less related to the fact that now, per the cost containment plan by Bob Iger that he initiated and greenlit just weeks ago, it's all about spending less and making all the movies and the TV shows for the next 2 to 3 years smaller scale projects, both story-wise and filmmaking-wise. So having a tighter and smaller crew working on these things and having a more tight story. You know, less areas to explore, less characters, less special effects, etc., etc. Things like that. I'm not shocked the fact that Kathleen Kennedy would go through to this extra length to do this, and it just seems like that she is so egotistical to the point where she can't take any level of criticism, and that's just narcissistic behavior. And as you all know, narcissism is a mental illness. It's true. And that needs to be curated somehow. And when you look at stuff like this, somebody running the show like Kathleen Kennedy for Acolyte, Skeleton Crew, and Skeleton Crew Season 2, I honestly feel bad for those George Lucas loyalists that were attached to the Acolyte. Very few of them, mind you, not all that many, but few of them were working on the show, still, of course, to the point where they really felt like it was going against George Lucas's, you know, overall view of Star Wars and what it really stands for. Even Leslie Headland went on record saying that this show is nothing like George Lucas's Star Wars. That was the whole point. Now, moving onwards, Skeleton Crew has long been reported to be the most toxic environment for a Star Wars project since ever. Which, of course, on top of this, though some of Lucas's loyals remain as employees, which is a positive, many of them were laid off by Kennedy for raising issues about Kennedy's direction for both of those shows that are reportedly very controversial for hardcore fans upcoming, as they literally retcon many elements of both the prequels and the originals and destroy George Lucas's legacy and what Star Wars stood for as a franchise, philosophically speaking, of course. Here's the problem that I have with this too, is that you even have somebody like Kathleen Kennedy who lies, who has gone on record lying back, I believe it was in 2018, where she literally said there's no source material that we could have pulled from for the sequel trilogy. Nothing at all. Basically saying that Legends did not exist, that nothing like Star Wars Expanded Universe books and comics existed, and really tried to make it true, or make it seem true, to new casual fans that know nothing about that. It's like she was trying to bury Legends, and she went on record saying that. And that just goes to show you that somebody like Kathleen Kennedy, who tries to make herself seem like she's so, you know, positively driven and trying to respect George on camera, eventually everything just started degrading over time. It's becoming more and more inflammatory now, to the point where she just does not care. She hires somebody like Leslie Headland, who says what she said back in 2019 about Lucas, to run the show of The Acolyte. Says it all. It really does. And so I think that this is why Skeleton Crew, once it drops this year, in November to December, that's the time frame. I still believe it might get delayed, to be honest, but we'll have to wait and see. I think it's going to be an interesting little debut to see what the show's all about, what Kathleen Kennedy and John Watts are all about destroying Lucas's vision of the franchise. So, anyway, I would really like to hear your opinion on this, to have everybody chime in below in the comments what you all have to say about this. And if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys later.
From night to moon, we hear them moans again.